Mr. Acting Speaker, I rise in support of this bill, the Second-Hand Vehicle Dealers Miscellaneous Amendment Bill 2023. In doing so, Mr. Speaker, it's because I'm sure this is probably the case with a lot of other MPs, the two areas of complaints I get in my office in terms of consumer products would be houses and shonky workmanship in houses, etc., and cars. Generally speaking, cars, I have young people come and see me about cars and the car they purchased, which it turned out to be a bit of a lemon. Some dealers are quite good at making sure the contracts are written in a way that deprives them on the consumer rights, or they are done in a way where they're just below that amount when certain warranties do not apply. And often the cheaper the car, it's more often a younger person who needs to purchase one, and they're the one actually who often gets hurt the most and actually has the least recourse. And so anything which actually improves consumer protection for people buying cars should be supported, including, as I said, the other one is probably not so much young people, but adults or perhaps young people buying their first home, where the workmanship is less than satisfactory. Over the last couple of years, it'd be fair to say that I've received more complaints about shonky workmanship on houses than I have in the previous 14, 15 years. And there may be some reasons for that. I suppose some contract prices have been fixed and sometimes costs have gone up, and so perhaps some builders have decided to cut some corners to actually make ends meet. Now, I've had some of the stories I've heard, if they're half true, they're pretty worrying, where a person had a house where their ceiling collapsed before they actually moved in. So one would worry about the quality of the workmanship, the rest of the house, etc. Downpipes, gutters and all that sort of stuff, pretty poor quality, whole range of issues. And so, as I think was mentioned by the member for Elizabeth, two probably most expensive items people invest in their lives, probably their house, their home and their car. It's probably the two in that order, amongst other things, but those two are quite important. And so, and we are dealing with one of those today, which is cars. So, unfortunately, as I mentioned, the people who are hurt the most by misrepresentations regarding the state of a vehicle are the people who can least afford it, because often they're buying second-hand cars and often they're buying cars at the cheaper end of the scale. So hopefully this bill will improve the consumer protection rights for younger people or anybody who's purchasing a car. My understanding is that this bill has arisen as a result of advocacy by the industry through the Motor Trades Association. But having said that, I'm also advised that some of the suggestions I've made actually also improve the consumer protections for people purchasing cars. So it's good to see that both what industry wants and what consumers need actually, in this case, match up and help remove some of the red tape from the industry, but also improve the quality of consumer protection for the consumers. Now I understand that these amendments, some of these amendments have been advocated by the industry since back to 2016 and been promoted through business, and also that I'm glad to see this minister has taken up these changes and brought them before us to look at. I'll talk briefly about some of the overview about the bill, then I'll go into some perhaps more details of the bill itself. One of the key areas which has been discussed already is that when the odd item being commonly not being played around with, and so this, the actual mileage, is it still called mileage or is it kilometrage, is recorded, and the number of cars I've actually sat in and where the thing doesn't actually move. When I've been a passenger and I've always been interested in knowing how many actually, what is the mileage in this car, whether the person doesn't care or the person's just seeking to make sure they get a better resale value. And it is an important issue though, jokes aside, because it can do two things. One, it misrepresents the age, it can represent the, how much the car's done. But secondly, it also misrepresents when often some safety checks have to be done, servicing and safety checks, which can be quite dangerous to the person who's actually driving the vehicle. So I know very little about cars, so I don't even know what people do to wind back the mileage, etc. in the vehicle. I have no idea. All I know about cars is the colour, how many doors they have, how many seats they have, and whether you put the petrol. And that's my knowledge of cars. And that, but it is clear that this happens in real life. Mr. Acting Speaker, what's been recommended is that the penalties for tampering with a car, with the actual mileage of a car, needs to be changed, which I agree with. And also in this bill, the government's actually introducing a compensation scheme for victims of tampering. Currently, victims can only obtain compensation when their dealer has been convicted of an offence as well. Where it's a private seller, no compensation is available with the Act. Also, the bill also seeks to make some other changes regarding disclosure requirements for defects not subject to duty to repair, certain things regarding waiving duty to repair rights, and also waiving cooling-off rights, and also amendments to disclosure requirements for previous owner details. Now, Mr. Acting Speaker, I'll just go perhaps a bit more detail, and also perhaps some of the rationale behind some of these changes. So under new section 23A, under Part 4 of the Second-Hand Vehicle Dealers Act 1995, dealers and auctioneers selling cars on behalf of dealers have a duty to repair a defect that is present in the vehicle or appears in the vehicle after it's sold. There are a number of exceptions to this requirement, including vehicles over 15 years old or have been driven for more than 20,000 kilometres before the sale. Dealers and auctioneers selling cars on behalf of dealers will now be permitted to disclose defects in the vehicle that will not be subject to the duty of repair. So I suppose what's happening here, as long as the disclosure is made, a person is actually then makes a judgment as to whether they're prepared to pay that price for the car or not pay that price, and also seek perhaps to have the vehicle repaired before they buy it. So it's certainly, the disclosure is important, but the disclosure is also subject to the vehicle remaining safe to drive on the road, which I think is a requirement of all vehicles to be sold that actually are in a form to be safe on the road. And that's actually one of the cases I had with a young person. In his view, he actually couldn't drive the car after a few months, but apparently because the price he paid was just under that threshold where warranties kick in, or rights kick in, even though it wasn't a huge amount, he lost all his money because he had no recourse. And these amendments also bring South Australia up to date with similar arrangements in other jurisdictions in alliance with the consumer guarantees in the Australian consumer laws. Under section 33(2), waiving duty to repair rights, purchasers are currently able to waive their right to have a defective vehicle repaired under section 23 duty to repair requirements by signing a prescribed document. Under these amendments, section 33 will be removed. Will remove the ability to waive this right to have a vehicle repaired under the duty to repair. This approach brings us South Australia into line with the Australian consumer law requirements that purchased vehicles must be acceptable quality and fit for purpose. And I think this is an important change. I think it's important that people understand that any product you buy with a car, etc., should be of acceptable quality and fit for the purpose it was purchased. Waiving cooling off rights under section 33(2)A. Under section 33 of the current Act, a consumer intended to waive their right to the 2-day cooling off period after vehicle sale must sign a prescribed form in the presence of a witness other than the dealer. Under the proposed changes, the document has been document 2, which is the prescribed form, has been retained to ensure that consumers are clearly informed about the implications of waiving the entitlement to the cooling off period, but purchaser would no longer require an independent witness to sign the document. Previous owner details, and this is something which I actually hadn't really thought about, and this is actually, when you think about it, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Under sections 16 and 20, dealers and auctioneers will not be required to display the name and address of a previous vehicle owner on notice of sale forms under changes to those sections. However, a potential purchaser will still be able to access the information on a request of a dealer or auctioneer, and failure to provide the information will attract maximum penalty of $5,000. In circumstances where the information is not reasonably available, the Consumer Business Service will not take enforcement action against the dealer or auctioneer where, for example, the vehicle has been purchased in another state where the requirement to disclose previous owner's details do not apply. These amendments seek to streamline sales, preserve the privacy of previous vehicle owners and ensure that consumers have access to information to support their purchasing decisions. So in this case, Mr. Acting Speaker, I'm glad to see there's still a right to that information, because if a potential buyer is a bit concerned about how many other people have actually previously owned this vehicle and how it's been used, I think that's important information which they can still do. Would you like me to seek?
Member for Lights, whether you wish to seek leave to continue your remarks or not.
I'm Mr. Acting Speaker. I'm happy to seek leave to continue my remarks.
Leave is sought. Is leave.